In the medieval world, purity was not a personal virtue, it was a public commodity. A bride's virginity determined her family's honor, her husband's pride, and her own survival. On the night of her wedding, the test awaited. The entire marriage depended on a single stain of blood. Servants, family members, even the priest, everyone expected proof by morning. The bed became an altar, and the woman a sacrifice to the gods of honor. If the sheet showed blood, celebrations followed. But if it didn't, terror began. Whispers turned to accusations, and accusations turned to punishment. Some brides were humiliated, others cast out, and a few were killed for failing a test no one could truly pass. Women began using desperate tricks, animal blood hidden in cloth, sharp thorns to wound themselves, anything to survive the judgment of men who knew nothing of their pain. These tests were not about faith or virtue. They were instruments of control. They stripped women of privacy, dignity, and safety. In the candlelit darkness of medieval chambers, the cries of countless brides echoed a chorus of fear, silenced by the demand for purity. Love, in this cruel era, was never about hearts. It was about blood. For a medieval bride, the wedding night was not a moment of joy, it was a performance of purity. After the feasting and prayers, she was led to the bridal bed, trembling. Servants, relatives, even nobles waited nearby, ready to celebrate or condemn. The doors closed, but her every move was under invisible eyes. The pressure was unbearable. One act, one stain, could decide her fate forever. If blood marked the sheets, the household erupted in cheer. The bride was declared virtuous, her family's honor secured. But if no proof appeared, the nightmare began. The whisper spread faster than plague. Impure, they said, dishonorable. Some brides were paraded through streets in humiliation, their names forever tied to disgrace. Others faced beatings, annulment, or worse. The husband's pride outweighed her suffering, and society stood watching. Many brides, terrified, resorted to painful deceit using animal blood, pricking their skin, anything to prove what nature sometimes denied. These women were victims of a system built on cruelty. Their bodies were currency, their pain, entertainment. Behind the silk gowns and golden rings, medieval weddings hid a world where a woman's worth was measured not by her heart, but by the stains on a sheet. Beneath the shining candles and noble feasts, medieval marriages concealed unspeakable cruelty. They were not unions of love, but contracts of power bargains, sealed with fear and obedience. Once the vows were spoken, the true ritual began. The bedding ceremony. In many regions, guests escorted the couple to their chamber, singing crude songs and offering mock blessings. Curtains might close, but the humiliation remained. Some nobles even demanded witnesses to ensure the act was completed. The bride, often a young girl, trembled as the weight of expectation pressed upon her. She was told to obey, to endure, to prove. Her husband's pleasure and her family's reputation depended on the agony of one night. If the next morning brought no sign of blood, her world could collapse. Some women fainted, others wept silently. The church turned a blind eye, claiming such customs upheld morality. But behind that justification lay control over women's bodies, voices, and futures. These rituals stripped love of tenderness and replaced it with fear. In the cold chambers of castles and cottages alike, brides prayed not for affection, but for survival. Their wedding nights were not beginnings of joy, but chapters of quiet suffering, written in shame.
The court of Dornahelm glittered with silk and steel, nobles smiling by day, plotting by candlelight.
Prince Lorien had waited years to inherit the throne from his frail father, but the council chose his cousin, Prince Merrick, instead. A single decision ignited a storm of vengeance. During Merrick's coronation, as the choir sang and bells rang, Lorien approached with a ceremonial dagger, the royal gift of brotherhood. He knelt, offered it, as tradition demanded, and whispered, "For the crown." Before anyone could react, he drove the blade upward, straight through Merrick's heart. The choir's song turned to screams. Lorien stood, blood spattering his royal robes, and proclaimed himself
king.
None dared challenge him. Fear silenced courage. He ruled with terror, his throne forever stained. Yet on every anniversary of the coronation, he ordered the same dagger placed beside him, to remind all of how easily a crown could change hands. They say Lorien died in his sleep years later, found with that same dagger through his chest. No one entered his chamber that night. Only a whisper remained. The crown remembers. The great hall of Dunbarth was filled with laughter, wine, and deceit.
Lord Halric, known for his cunning, invited every noble of the realm to a feast celebrating peace after war.
Yet, hidden beneath that golden promise was vengeance older than memory. As the torches flickered, servants carried in roasted swans, spiced wine, and poisoned bread. The lords drank to brotherhood, and one by one, their laughter choked into silence. The queen's goblet fell, shattering. The duke's face turned ashen. Within moments, the feast became a grave. Halric stood from his seat, his eyes cold.
Now the debt of my father's blood is paid, he declared, watching the nobles collapse around him.
By dawn, over 50 corpses lay across the tables. The feast of peace, now a banquet of death. But vengeance breeds vengeance. Halric, Essone's steward, whose son died that night, slipped a blade beneath his ribs before sunrise. As Halric's lifeblood stained the table, the steward whispered, "A debt repaid again!" No feast was ever held in Dunbarth again. The hall stands silent, the smell of burnt wine still lingering. Travelers say that on stormy nights, ghostly laughter echoes within the last toast of the dead. They were brothers, not by blood, but by battle.
King Rohan and Sir Cedric had fought side by side in countless wars, their bond forged in fire and victory.
Cedric had sworn to protect his king until death, but he never thought he'd be the one to bring it. When Rowan married the Duchess of Elmer, jealousy began to whisper. Cedric had loved her in silence for years, and the thought of her in the king's arms burned through him like acid. The queen, cunning and ambitious, saw his pain and turned it into a weapon. She told Cedric that Rowan planned to banish him, calling him a knight grown too powerful. Enraged, Cedric confronted the king. Words turned to shouts, shouts to steel. The clash of swords echoed in the empty hall until Rohan fell. Blood pooling beneath the throne, they once dreamed of protecting together. Realizing the truth, that the queen had deceived him, Cedric placed the blade to his own heart, but before dying, he whispered, "We won every war, except the one inside me." The queen ruled briefly after, but her reign ended in madness. Some say she still roams the halls, hearing the ghostly clash of two brothers' blades. Too many medieval brides. The wedding night was not a celebration, it was a sentence. From the moment the vows were spoken, fear began to bloom. Young girls, some barely past childhood, were given to men old enough to be their fathers. The bridal chamber awaited like a dungeon, and the expectations were heavy as chains. They were told their purity was everything, that the honor of families, the future of alliances, even God's favor depended on it. Yet no one told them what awaited behind the closed door. Some wept silently, others prayed for mercy. The husband's pride demanded proof, and the bride's body became evidence. The next morning, the entire household waited. The blood on the sheet decided her destiny. If absent, shame followed. Some brides were accused of secret lovers, of deceit, even of witchcraft. A single night could destroy her forever. These women lived in a world that worshipped purity but offered no kindness. The bridal chamber, adorned with flowers and candles, was not a place of love, it was a room of judgment. For every bride who emerged with honor, another left in silence, broken by a test she never asked to take. In the brutal code of medieval honor, a woman's pain became a man's pride. Virginity was the measure of virtue, and its proof the blood of the wedding night was the measure of family worth. From nobles in castles to peasants in cottages, the same cruel belief ruled. Purity must be proven through suffering. Fathers guarded their daughters' innocence like treasure. Husbands demanded evidence of chastity. And when the moment came, it was not tenderness that filled the chamber, but fear. The cries of countless brides echoed in silence as the weight of reputation pressed down upon them. The next morning decided everything. If blood marked the sheets, families celebrated. If not, punishment followed. Some women were whipped, some divorced, and others executed all, because nature had not played its cruel part. The hypocrisy was staggering.
Men's sins were forgiven, even praised, while women bore the full burden of morality.
Virginity was never about holiness, it was about control. Pain became proof, and honor was written in suffering. In a world obsessed with purity, love was forgotten, and cruelty became tradition. Few medieval customs were as grotesque as the public virginity ceremony. In certain European regions, wedding nights were not private but witnessed. After the vows, guests escorted the couple to the bridal chamber, singing and jeering, as if preparing for entertainment. The newlyweds were expected to consummate the marriage while others listened, sometimes even watched. When morning came, the sheet was displayed before the guests as proof of completion. The blood was hailed as honor. Its absence was treated as sin. The bride's body was reduced to evidence, her dignity erased in the name of tradition. For noblewomen, this ritual was political thetaira, display to secure alliances and power. For common women, it was public humiliation. Those who failed to perform faced ridicule or violence. Some fainted from fear. Others were forced to relive their trauma in public. These ceremonies revealed the darkest side of medieval society, a fascination with purity that bordered on obsession.
What should have been sacred became spectacle.
Behind the cheers and drunken laughter, a silent truth echoed: women were never seen as people, only symbols. Their shame was entertainment, and their pain a price for men's pride. Beneath the glitter of medieval feasts and the ringing of church bells, wedding customs hid a darkness that few dared speak of. Marriage was a transaction, not a union of love. Daughters were traded for land, alliances, and titles. Once the deal was sealed, the wedding night became a ritual of cruel test that valued blood over emotion.
The bedding ceremony marked the start of this ordeal.
Guests would accompany the couple to their chamber, offering mock blessings and dirty jokes. Once alone, the bride faced the burden of purity. Her husband's desire was law. Her discomfort, irrelevant. The following dawn would reveal her fate.
If blood was seen, she was praised as virtuous.
If not, she faced humiliation, suspicion, and sometimes punishment. The church claimed these customs upheld morality, yet they were nothing but cruelty wrapped in ritual. Women's bodies became battlegrounds for male pride and social status. Behind the silk gowns and holy vows, pain festered in silence. The true horror of medieval weddings wasn't the ceremony, it was the night that followed. For every song of love sung in great halls, there were unseen tears shed behind closed doors, where innocence was tested and humanity forgotten. In the Middle Ages, marriage was less a promise of love and more a contract of control. For many brides, their wedding day was not a dream, it was the beginning of fear. Once the vows were spoken, the bride ceased to belong to herself. Her body, her choices, and her fate were handed over to her husband. The wedding night was the cruel symbol of that exchange. While songs and laughter filled the great halls, dread crept behind the closed doors of the bridal chamber. The young woman, often barely 16, knew what awaited. She was expected to prove her virtue through pain, to offer evidence of purity by bleeding. Failure could ruin her name, her family, even her life. Many brides endured violence, disguised as ritual, their cries drowned out by the sound of celebration outside. The morning brought judgment. If the sheets bore no blood, disgrace followed. The very honor of two families rested upon her suffering.
For men, marriage was freedom and legacy.
For women, it was surrender. Behind every medieval wedding veil was a prisoner, smiling through fear. What history calls romance, many brides remembered as horror the night their innocence was stolen not by love, but by tradition. No weapon in medieval society was sharper than shame. It was wielded against women with precision, wrapped in the illusion of purity and piety. Virginity was treated like a divine badge of worth, something to protect, display, and prove. But when that proof failed, shame became deadly. From the poorest villages to the grandest castles, brides faced the same terror. After marriage, they stood trial in silence. If the bloody evidence was missing, rumors began. She was impure. She deceived her husband. She dishonored her family. These whispers spread faster than plague. And while men's sins were forgiven with laughter, women's lives could be destroyed by silence. Some women took their own lives rather than face public humiliation. Others were beaten or cast out, their names erased from family records. The church preached virtue, but turned a blind eye to cruelty.
It was not purity that was sacred, it was control.
In the Middle Ages, shame was more powerful than any sword. It bled women dry, without drawing a drop. The obsession with virginity did not protect honor, it murdered it. And beneath the stained sheets and whispered prayers, countless innocent souls were sacrificed to society's merciless idea of purity. When historians speak of medieval romance, they often forget the screams behind the music. The wedding night was a ceremony of cruel blend of expectation, violence, and humiliation. In noble courts, the act of consummation was often considered a matter of politics, not passion. For peasants, it was a test of obedience. In some regions, brides were stripped and examined by older women to ensure purity. Others were forced to drink potions, believed to guarantee conception. Some were even subjected to the grotesque bedding ceremony, where guests escorted the couple to bed, laughing as they were laid together. Curtains closed, but the shame lingered.
What followed was worse.
The bride's fear was dismissed as innocence, her pain as proof of virtue. The morning after, her fate rested on a sheet. Blood meant honor.
None meant ruin.
Few understood that biology didn't always bleed, but superstition demanded it. These customs were not love, they were control disguised as sanctity. The true torture was not the act itself, but the silence that followed. No one spoke of the tears, the fear, or the nightmares that haunted countless brides for years.
The medieval wedding night was not a celebration, it was a quiet battlefield of suffering.
Beneath the glow of candles and the scent of roses, the medieval wedding was a trap.
What began as a moment of hope often ended in horror.
The bride, veiled in silk and fear, was told her destiny was divine to serve, to obey, and above all, to prove. The night of her marriage was not about love, but about loyalty measured in blood. As the celebrations faded, she was led to her chamber, trembling. The husband's eyes were not filled with tenderness, but with expectation. Outside, servants waited, ready to celebrate the proof of purity. If the blood-stained sheet emerged, songs of honor echoed through the halls. But if it did not, everything changed. Accusations spread swiftly. Some brides were dragged before priests, accused of deception. Others faced annulment or worse. In a world obsessed with appearances, even the innocent could be condemned. For many, that single night turned love into fear. The bond meant to unite became a weapon of control. And long after the candles burned out, the memory remained a reminder that in medieval times, a woman's worth was not written in her heart, but in her blood. The medieval world demanded proof of what should never have been questioned. A woman's purity was treated as property, and her blood as evidence. The morning after the wedding, families awaited the signala-stained sheet, proudly displayed as proof that the bride had been untouched before marriage. It was not love they celebrated, it was ownership. If the proof appeared, the household rejoiced. But if it did not, the joy turned to suspicion. A bride without evidence could face ruin. Some were beaten, others exiled. A few even executed for failing a test they could never control. Many women resorted to desperate measures, pricking their fingers, using animal blood, or staining the sheet with red dye. Each act a quiet rebellion against a system that demanded pain for purity. The cruel irony was that the test proved nothing, yet decided everything. Behind every medieval wedding was the same story of control, not affection, of pride, not love. The bride's blood became a tool to preserve male honor, and her body a battlefield for medieval morality. The true horror was unveils. The test itself fit was the belief that women's worth began and ended with the color red. In the medieval world, innocence was never protection, it was a burden. A young bride, raised to believe purity was her greatest virtue, often walked into marriage, blind to the cruelty that awaited her. The church and society taught her obedience, not understanding. Her wedding night, supposedly sacred, became a silent battlefield between expectation and truth. Once the door closed, her fate was sealed. If blood marked the sheets, she was praised as honorable. If not, the world turned against her. Neighbors whispered. Families cursed her name. Husbands accused her of deceit or betrayal. Some women were tortured to confess sins they never committed. Others were abandoned or executed. And yet, so many of these brides were simply victims of ignorance. Nature does not always follow rules. But in the medieval mind, biology meant nothing compared to reputation. The bride's worth, her family's honor, even her safety depended on something she could not control. For every woman who survived that night, countless others were lost, shamed, silenced, erased from history. Their only crime was being human. Society worshipped virtue but destroyed the virtuous. The innocent suffered because power demanded proof, and proof required pain. Behind the shining altars and holy vows, the medieval wedding night hid sinister secrets. What was celebrated as sacred was often an act of cruelty disguised as ritual. Once the ceremony ended, the feast turned to whispers. Servants and family members waited for what came next, the proof of purity. In many noble houses, the bedding ceremony was not private. Guests escorted the couple to their chamber, laughing and singing bawdy songs as they stripped the bride of her gown. Curtains were drawn, but ears remained pressed to the door. Her cries were mistaken for success, her silence for failure. By dawn, all waited for the blood-stained cloth that would decide her fate. These traditions turned intimacy into spectacle, pain into honor. Some women fainted from fear, others wept quietly in the dark. The morning after, they had no voice. If the proof was missing, they were cast out as liars. If it appeared, their suffering was praised. In a society ruled by men and superstition, love had no place. What began as a celebration of unity became a theater of shame. The sinister truth of the medieval wedding night was simple. It wasn't about love, but control. Two medieval men. The bloodstained sheet was the ultimate proof of purity.
But for women, it was a symbol of terror.
This single expectation ruined countless lives, innocent brides condemned for not bleeding on command. The myth was simple. A virgin must always bleed on her wedding night. The truth was far more complex, but no one cared to learn it. When the morning came and the sheet remained unstained, panic spread. Husbands accused, families doubted, and priests condemned. A woman's worth, her reputation, even her survival, depended on a biological lie. Many brides, desperate and terrified, faked the stain using animal blood, pricking their fingers or hiding wounds beneath the sheets. But even then, fear lingered. One accusation was enough to destroy everything. Some were divorced, others beaten, a few executed for dishonor. No man faced the same trial. Only women carried the burden of proof. The so-called proof of purity was nothing but proof of oppression. It served the pride of men and the cruelty of custom. For medieval women, love was not measured in affection, but in pain. Their wedding night was not the start of a marriage, it was a judgment they could never truly win. Behind the stone walls of medieval castles, what happened in bridal chambers was far from the romantic tales told by poets. The night of a wedding was not a celebration, it was a test. The bride entered the room trembling, the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. She was told her purity was her worth, and tonight, she must prove it. The candles flickered as silence filled the chamber. Outside, servants and family waited for a sound, a sign, a stain. The groom, often a stranger chosen for alliance or power, bore no understanding of compassion. His task was to claim and conquer. Hers was to bleed. Some brides wept, Others froze in terror. The next morning revealed everything. If blood was shown, she was praised. If not, her world collapsed. Some were branded liars, others accused of witchcraft or infidelity.
A few never saw another dawn.
Behind those closed doors, love was never the goal, it was obedience.
The bridal chamber became a courtroom, the sheet, a verdict. And for centuries, women endured that judgment in silence, their pain hidden behind the illusion of purity. Of all medieval traditions, none were more degrading than the public display of the proof of purity. After the wedding night, the blood-stained sheet was carried through the streets or hung from windows as a symbol of honor. Crowds cheered, songs were sung, and men toasted to their triumph. But for the bride, it was pure humiliation. Her most private pain was turned into public proof. Her body became evidence for others to judge. The same community that praised her for bleeding would condemn her if she didn't. There was no escape, no dignity-only scrutiny. In noble courts, this act was political. A family's reputation could rise or fall based on that single piece of cloth. In villages, it was entertainment, a spectacle of superstition and cruelty. Women had no voice in their own stories. They existed only as symbols of honor or disgrace. The irony was unbearable. What was called virtue was built on violence. The proof celebrated by all was, in truth, a display of pain. And as the sheet waved in the morning air, it carried not the pride of purity but the shame of an entire society that forgot what humanity truly meant. In the medieval world, a bride's silence could kill her. After the wedding feast ended and the music faded, the night turned into judgment. When dawn came, the maids would search for the proof, the crimson stain that was supposed to define a woman's worth. If none appeared, the whispers began. Her husband, once smiling before the altar, could now turn into her executioner. Some men dragged their brides before priests, accusing them of deception. Others sought justice themselves through violence or worse. The church, instead of offering mercy, demanded confession. Women were tortured until they admitted to sins they never committed: infidelity, witchcraft, or secret affairs. But the truth was simple. Not every woman bled. The human body was not as cruel as the customs that ruled it. Still, facts had no power against pride and ignorance. A single unstained sheet could destroy generations of honor. Families disowned daughters. Some brides vanished, sent away to convents, exiled, or buried in silence. The bloodless wedding night became a symbol of death, of freedom, of dignity, of truth. For every man's pride, a woman paid the price in pain. And even centuries later, history remembers their suffering, though their names were erased. Medieval medicine was filled with superstition, and nowhere was it crueler than in the testing of purity. Before the wedding, midwives, priests, or even mothers-in-law were tasked with examining the bride's body for signs of virginity. The most sacred part of her existence was treated like property, to be inspected, judged, and approved. These so-called tests were barbaric. A woman's innocence was proven by checking for the hymen, fragile tissue misunderstood by all. Some used metal instruments or candles, others forced humiliating inspections. It was not science. It was torture wrapped in the guise of morality. A failed test meant ruin. The bride could lose her dowry, her marriage, or her life. Many were shamed publicly, stripped of their dignity before they even reached the altar. Those who passed felt no victory, only relief that their suffering hadn't ended in disgrace. These tests were never about purity. They were about power. The church and men's authority depended on controlling women's bodies. The virginity test became a weapon, and fear was its sharpest edge.
Behind the white veils and golden rings, countless women trembled not from excitement, but from dread.
In medieval times, love rarely mattered. Marriages were contract alliances between families, sealed not with affection, but with bloodlines and gold. The bride and groom were strangers bound by duty, and love was often seen as dangerous, even sinful. But for some, love found a way and was punished for it. A young woman who fell for a commoner could be forced into marriage with a man twice her age. Her pleas were ignored, her tears dismissed, and if her heart betrayed her body, if she entered her wedding night without the so-called proof of purity, her love could cost her life. The cruelest irony was that the same society that preached virtue practiced betrayal. Husbands kept mistresses freely, wives were killed for less. Some lovers ran away, choosing exile over humiliation. Others faced the pyre, accused of seduction or witchcraft. Love, in those centuries, was rebellion. To love freely was to defy the chains of class and custom, and those who dared to love often paid in blood. The medieval world wrote poems about romance, but, in reality, it destroyed those who truly felt it. The church ruled every breath of medieval life, and marriage was no exception. What began as a spiritual union soon became a stage for judgment. Priests preached purity from their pulpits, declaring a woman's virginity a gift to be proven, not believed. Confession booths became interrogation rooms. Priests demanded brides to swear chastity before God. And if scandal arose after the wedding night, the church often sided with the husband. Trials were held to determine the truth of a woman's virtue. Some were forced to undergo invasive examinations. Others were subjected to public shame. Ironically, many clerics themselves lived in secret sin, yet condemned women for supposed impurity. The holy symbol of the cross was twisted into a weapon of control. The church claimed to protect morality, but in truth, it protected male power. Behind every sermon about virtue was a threat. Disobey, and you will be cursed. The sacred became sinister. The hymns that echoed through stone cathedrals, masked cries that no one would hear. And in the name of God, countless women suffered for the sins of men.
Royal weddings dazzled the medieval world. Music, jewels, feasts lasting days.
But once the doors closed, the splendor vanished. The same kings and queens who commanded armies were bound by the same cruel rituals of purity. Even the most powerful woman could not escape the judgment of a blood-stained sheet. In royal courts, the wedding night was a matter of state. Courtiers and servants were ordered to watch the bedchamber door, ready to announce success or shame. The morning after, the proof was displayed before witnesses. If the queen-to-be failed this test, alliances crumbled, wars began, and her crown could vanish overnight. Some queens secretly faked the proof, aided by loyal handmaidens who knew the cost of failure. Others faced exile or execution, their reputations destroyed. The humiliation was universal, from peasant brides to royal daughters. Power meant nothing when purity was questioned. Behind the velvet curtains and golden crowns, there were tears no one saw. The royal wedding night was not a celebration, it was a trap. And while the world celebrated royal love, it was built on fear, pain, and the silence of those who could not speak their truth. In the cold candlelight of a medieval bridal chamber, silence was the only power a woman possessed. She couldn't refuse, couldn't cry too loudly, couldn't resist the ritual she had been taught to endure. Every move, every sound could be judged. A quiet woman was considered obedient, pure, and respectable. But in truth, her silence hid terror. As the husband claimed what society said was his right, she bit her lips, staring at the ceiling beams, praying the night would end. The next morning, her fate would depend on a single mark on a piece of cloth, proof of pain mistaken for purity. If the sheet was bloodless, her silence turned against her. She didn't scream. They would say, "She must have done this before." No matter what she did, she lost. Her body was evidence, her voice a crime. But some women learned to use silence as defiance. They hid their pain, their thoughts, their truth, preserving a power that men could never understand. Centuries later, that quiet strength still echoes in the stories of forgotten brides. For in a world that demanded their submission, silence became their secret rebellion. In medieval courts, the word of a woman meant nothing. Her virtue was not proven by her deeds or her faith, but by her blood. After marriage, families awaited a gruesome ceremony, The display of the blood-stained sheet, the evidence that the union had been pure and lawful. For noble families, it was political. A bride's failure to bleed could annul the marriage, break alliances, even cause wars. For commoners, it meant disgrace, beatings, or banishment. Women were trapped in a cycle of terror, where biology became destiny and pain became a public performance. Some desperate brides took matters into their own hands, drawing blood from their own bodies, staining the sheets in secret before dawn. Others bribed servants or used animal blood to save themselves from ruin. Their ingenuity was born, not from deceit, but from survival. The maiden's trial was nothing but cruelty, disguised as honor. It stripped away dignity, replacing love with suspicion. And when the morning light touched the red-stained cloth, no one saw the truth that it wasn't proof of purity, but a symbol of suffering carved into history. In medieval times, innocence was never protection, it was danger. Society demanded that women remain pure, untouched, and silent, yet punished them for the very thing it glorified. The more innocent a girl was, the less she understood what awaited her on her wedding night. Brides were told to obey, not to question. Their lack of knowledge was called virtue, their fear mistaken for modesty. But when the wedding night came, that same innocence was used against them. Their pain was dismissed as duty, their confusion ignored. If they cried, they were weak. If they didn't bleed, they were impure. Innocence became a curse, and knowledge especially of their own bodhiswas treated as sin. Women lived and died under laws that denied them understanding. The cruelest irony. The very men who demanded purity often sought pleasure elsewhere, free from the same standards. Innocence was never about virtue, it was about control. The medieval world feared women who knew too much, loved too deeply, or lived too freely. And so, innocence was turned into a weapon sharp enough to wound those it was meant to protect. Behind locked wooden doors and drawn curtains, the blood chamber awaited. Every medieval bride knew its name, even if no one spoke it aloud. It was the place where innocence met judgment, where whispers turned into screams. The chamber was decorated with flowers, candles, and fine linens, but its true purpose was dark. The sheet, white as snow, lay waiting to decide her destiny. The husband's role was simple: take what was his. The bride's role was cruel: endure it and prove it. Outside, the household held its breath. Maids waited in silence.
Relatives whispered prayers and gossip. When morning came, the proof was revealed: a red stain for honor, or its absence for disgrace.
But not all women accepted their fate. Some planned their survival. They hid small blades, pricked their skin, or used vials of blood from animals to save themselves. Others weren't so lucky. For them, the blood chamber became a tomb of innocence. The world called it tradition, but for the women who lived it, it was terror hidden beneath lace and vows, a ritual that turned love into law and humanity into humiliation. History remembers kings, knights, and wars, but not the voices that cried softly in the dark. The brides of the medieval world were taught that obedience was holy and that their worth began and ended with purity. But in the silence of the wedding night, their hearts told another story. Many dreamed of love, of kindness, of a life beyond fear. Instead, they found pain disguised as duty.
Some were children, too young to understand.
Others were noble women, traded like gold for political power. Their tears were wiped away before dawn, their names lost to history. Yet their suffering did not vanish. It lingered in the legends of haunted castles, in the folklore of cursed weddings, in the invisible wounds of generations. Each woman who endured that night left behind a whisper, a warning, a truth that no custom built on cruelty can last forever. The world that once demanded proof of purity now faces its shame. The forgotten voices of those brides still echo, not as cries of defeat, but as testaments of survival. They remind us that honor was never found in blood, but in the courage to endure what no one should.